In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, announcing the freedom of the slaves. The American Civil War entered an intense phase. At this time, American paleontologist Cope, to avoid the conflict, was traveling in Europe. One day he arrived in Berlin, and met his colleague and fellow countryman Marsh. When fellow countrymen meet, it feels like a happy reunion. The two of them had a very good impression of each other. Marsh acted as a gracious host, showing Cope around the city of Berlin. At the time, 24-year-old Cope was a young renowned genius, having already published 37 papers, while 32-year-old Marsh had not yet completed his doctorate. This difference made Marsh quite envious. As he was leaving, Cope invited Marsh to visit his workshop after returning to America. This was just a polite gesture. However, Marsh was blinded by his envy, and took this remark as a taunt, mocking him for his age, and for not having completed his studies. A seed of resentment was thus planted in Marsh's heart. After the war ended, Cope returned to America. Around the end of 1867 and early 1868, Cope received a massive fossilized skeleton from Fort Wallace, Kansas. He discovered it was a type of plesiosaur, but it was larger than any of its kind he had ever seen in Europe. Cope hastily examined it, and then an academic conference in March reported his discovery, naming the specimen Elasmosaurus because its pectoral and pelvic bones were thin and flat. The discovery of Elasmosaurus was of extraordinary importance to Cope. It was the largest and most complete plesiosaur found in North America at the time. Cope estimated it was 13 to 14 meters long, though later studies suggested it was only 10.3 meters. At 28 years old, Cope felt he was on the verge of greatness, and quickly began to assemble the Elasmosaurus fossil. In August of 1868, at a meeting of the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia, Cope presented his skeletal reconstruction. A creature with a short neck and a long tail. What Cope had actually placed the head of the Elasmosaurus on its tail. You have to understand, plesiosaurs had been known for over 40 years, and their long-necked appearance was widely recognized. It was impossible that Cope was unaware of this, so why would he make such a fundamental error? Was it intentional or an oversight? In truth, paleontological research in Cope's time was not as advanced as it is today. Identifying the position of plesiosaur vertebrae was a highly technical challenge. Previously, Cope's mentor Leidy, when describing a plesiosaur called Simoliosaurus, had incorrectly reversed its vertebrae and also believed it had a short neck. Because Cope trusted his mentor's research, and with the Elasmosaurus fossil, its jaw was found near the tail end, Cope followed his mentor's mistaken path, assuming Elasmosaurus was a short-necked plesiosaur. At the time, no one at the conference objected. In a paper published later, Cope even named the family Elasmosaurus belonged to Streptosauria because their vertebral features seemed inverted compared to other vertebrates. A year later, Cope's error became even more widespread. In the American Naturalist magazine, he discussed America's ancient reptiles and included a lifelike reconstruction drawing. The picture depicted the western interior seaway from 80 million years ago. At that time, this seaway divided North America into east and west. In the drawing, the one standing with a wide jaw is Laelaps. The one with its neck raised and covered in scales is a Mosasaur, and the one resting in the water, with a short neck and a long tail, is Elasmosaurus. This reconstruction drawing was very vivid. The popular magazine Harper's Monthly immediately featured it as well. This is America's oldest continuously published monthly magazine. Marsh had by this time returned to America as a professor of vertebrate paleontology at Yale University. One day, he visited Cope's workshop to view the fossils and saw the incorrectly assembled Elasmosaurus skeleton. He told Cope, "You have placed the Elasmosaurus's head on its tail." Cope was indignant. The two began to argue, but neither could convince the other. So, they asked Leidy to determine who was right and who was wrong. In fact, Leidy had already realized his mistake regarding Simoliosaurus, but had not yet publicly corrected it. He walked into Cope's workshop, silently picked up the Elasmosaurus skull, and placed it on the other end of the body. Cope was instantly and utterly mortified. His mind was reeling. He felt his mentor had led him astray. Seeing how the situation had escalated, in 1870 Leidy, in academic meetings and papers, explained in detail his own error in reversing the Simoliosaurus and emphasized that Cope had been misled by him, causing him to assemble the Elasmosaurus incorrectly. So Cope rewrote the paper and tried to buy back the previously issued copies. Unfortunately, Marsh had already obtained a copy. He was not willing to return this crucial piece of evidence to Cope. The seed of resentment had long since taken root in his heart. Combined with their rivalry in fossil collecting, he was not about to give Cope the same courtesy Leidy had. In the days that followed, Marsh repeatedly brought up this error. For instance, at some unknown later date, he wrote a letter to Cope taunting him. "When you put the head on the tail, why did not you call it Ridiculosaurus?" In 1890, while he and Cope were arguing in the New York Herald, he brought up the old issue again, saying that he had immediately pointed out the Elasmosaurus error to Cope at the time. In short, after the Elasmosaurus incident, the two men never had a friendly conversation again. Elasmosaurus thus became the spark that ignited the bone wars. The correctly restored Elasmosaurus had an incredible 72 neck vertebrae. Of its 10.3 meter length, 7.1 meters was its neck for a long time. It was the animal with the most neck vertebrae in Earth's history, until it was surpassed in 2012 by its close relative Albertonectus. Its neck had 3 more vertebrae than Elasmosaurus. Early research suggested that the necks of the plesiosaur family were very flexible, able to raise their heads from the water in its curve like a swan. This incorrect image became widespread, and it also played a role in a famous hoax. In 1933, someone at Loch Ness took a photograph of the Loch Ness monster. It resembled a plesiosaur, with its neck and head extending from the water. For a time, everyone thought the Loch Ness monster was a surviving plesiosaur. But today's research shows a plesiosaur's neck was much stiffer than a swan's, and simply could not be raised that high, so this faked photograph is also outdated. Although the Elasmosaurus's neck was not as abnormally flexible as a swan's, we should not go too far in the other direction. It still possessed a degree of flexibility. One study showed that the necks of Elasmosaurids could achieve up to 75 to 177 degrees of downward movement, 87 to 155 degrees of upward movement, and 94 to 176 degrees of sideways movement. It could also form a shallow shape horizontally, similar to a snake's posture when preparing to attack. So what was the purpose of this long neck? Scientists have proposed various creative hypotheses for this, one reaching into narrow crevices to find prey, 2. An organ for sexual selection, 3. Having patterns on the neck, 4. Serving as an air tank to store more air, 5. Storing food like a hamster, and 6. Using the neck to generate electricity. Which theory do you think is the most convincing? Let us know in the comments section. In reality, none of these ideas are very plausible. The neck's main purpose was primarily for foraging, and there are 2 most likely foraging methods. One was bottom feeding. Elasmosaurus would float near the seafloor, using its long neck and small head to find animals on the bottom. The other was ambush tactics. Elasmosaurus would hide its large body from a distance, using its neck flexibility to launch a surprise attack. The teeth of Elasmosaurus were long and thin, suited for ensnaring small prey rather than tearing into large animals. This means they were only interested in things they could swallow whole, such as various small fish and invertebrates. But with such a long neck, would not that affect its swimming? It seems to go against the principles of hydrodynamics. Actually, for aquatic animals to overcome water resistance, there is one universal secret, and that is body size. Because drag is proportional to an animal's frontal surface area, which is proportional to the square of its length, while volume is proportional to the cube of its length. Therefore, the larger the animal, the less drag it experiences per unit of volume when swimming. In other words, as long as the body is large enough, it does not matter how unusually shaped you are. Elasmosaurus weighed 2 to 4 tons. When swimming forward, its massive body size was enough to offset the negative effects of its long neck. It even experienced less drag per unit of volume than smaller ichthyosaurs. This means it could save considerable energy during long-distance migrations. However, the long neck did indeed affect the Elasmosaurus's ability to turn. The Elasmosaurus's neck acted as its rudder. Whichever way the neck turned, the body would follow in that direction. A long neck encounters greater resistance when turning. Therefore, the swimming agility of Elasmosaurus was quite poor. This was especially true when swimming quickly. And the long neck had another obvious disadvantage. It created a very large weak spot, making it an easy target for large predators. Given these disadvantages, what was the evolutionary advantage of such a long neck? Based on neck length, neck flexibility, and differences in swimming ability, the plesiosaur family likely employed a range of different foraging strategies. The longer a plesiosaur's neck, the larger its feeding area, and the lower its swimming flexibility, the more it relied on its neck for foraging, the less suited it was for chasing down prey. Different foraging strategies corresponded to different types of prey. Therefore, the benefit of a long neck was not to increase combat prowess, but to reduce competition with other similar species by focusing on specific prey. In fact, long-necked plesiosaurs were a very successful group of animals. Ichthyosaurs were the marine reptiles that were the most completely fish-shaped. By all appearances they seemed better adapted to the ocean than unusual creatures like plesiosaurs. However, ichthyosaurs disappeared much earlier than plesiosaurs. Plesiosaurs survived till the Great Extinction Event 66 million years ago, while ichthyosaurs vanished during an extinction event 94 million years ago, and were gone. One reason for the decline of the ichthyosaurs may have been the rise of teleost fish in the mid-Cretaceous period. Teleost fish had faster swimming speeds, which would have made it more difficult for chase predators like ichthyosaurs to hunt. But long-necked plesiosaurs thrived by using ambush and bottom-feeding tactics. Their unique strategy allowed them to bypass the strengths of teleost fish. The law of nature is not about selecting the creature with the most fighting strength, nor is there one standard correct answer. Elasmoris followed a special path of survival, developing the neck of a marine animal to its extreme. With its peculiar appearance, it tells a story about one of life's many possibilities. Everything in the world has its own unique charm. If you take the time to appreciate it, you can be deeply inspired and learn some new principles. Your support is the motivation for my work. Please consider showing your support. We will see you in the next one.